Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we're on the website of French auction portal Intrashare, and we're going to have a look at an auction by Millon Auctioneers, or Apolium as some of you may know them. They have a musical instrument auction coming up on the 29th of November, which is mainly kind of bowstringed instruments, violins, etc. But there are some other instruments as well at the end. 296 lots. Looks like it should be quite a good auction actually. Just looking at a brief overview of it. I haven't looked at the whole thing, but it looks like there's some pretty decent stuff, so it should be interesting. Bear in mind this is a French auction, so if you're looking to buy something and you're outside of France, then import, export fees, CITES restrictions, all of that fun. Looks like the buyer's premium is 25%, so that's whatever you kind of the final hammer price, 25% of that on top. Just to say, if you do enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing, liking or comment, because it really does help quite a lot. We're just going to try and get through this as quickly as we can and just see if there's anything interesting. Might take a little bit longer than normal just because of the fact that there are actually quite a lot of fairly interesting instruments, I think, but let's just see how we get on. So first of all, I've got a French violin, late 19th century there, 359 length of back. Looks kind of interesting enough actually, quite good photography there, so nice scroll. 800 to 1200 euros, that seems kind of fairly okay. Obviously you need to look at condition reports and all of that kind of stuff to know exactly what's going on here. Got a Mirko violin, early 20th century, the label of Bernardel, 1200 to 1400 there, 360 length of back. Fairly standard kind of French thing there. Another Mirko violin there with a Bernardel label, 1000 to 1500 euros. Oh, really nice back on that one there. A bit more of a Guarneri-esque model, 360 length of back there. All interesting so far. Got a German violin here, 1000 to 1200 euros, 362 length of back. Not super exciting on that one. Another French violin here. It's again kind of not so exciting. Looks like it's got some kind of open seam or problem at the front there. 600 to 800 on that one. Another French violin, 5 to 700, pretty standard French there. See what else we have. We're going to have a lot of these Mirko violins, JTL 6 to 800, quite nice back on that, 360 length of back. Right, something a bit better here. An 18th century French violin, beautiful instrument from the French school from the second part of the 18th century, with a illegible label, 364 though length of back, that's pretty long. Interestingly, this is 10 to 12,000 the estimate. But they only have this one picture, so that's a bit odd. Probably made by Francois Gavinier, so it's got an Etienne Vatelot certificate, probably hence the estimate. So a bit strange they haven't put more pictures up on that, but there we go. A French Mirko violin, 20th century, 1200 to 1500. You can almost kind of guess what these look like without looking at the pictures. They are pretty consistent. German violin, attributed to Leopold Vidal, bearing a label, 3 to 4000, 359 length of back. Quite a nice violin. They give you pretty brief condition reports here. Definitely worth asking more questions if you're interested in something. Italian violin made by Battista Cremaschi. Okay, 1963. Interesting. It's got an Eric Blott certificate, so that's pretty good. 6 to 8,000 on this. I think possibly not the finest looking Italian violin, but nevertheless it's got a certificate. French violin by Elofie Poisson. So Lyon 1903, 2 to 3,000. Pretty kind of standard, looks like it's suffered a little bit in the varnish departments. French violin made by Georges Cohn and Fille, 1935, 2.5 to 3,000. French violin by Moynal and Sherpatel. I think we're going to have to start skipping some of these because got quite a lot to go through, otherwise we'll be here forever. German violin made by August Friedrich Meissel, 1800 to 2000. Let's see what else we got here. French violin by Colin Mazar. These are always kind of popular. Colin Mazar Fille, 1500 to 2000. Needs a little bit of work. 19th century French violin, 2 to 3,000 on that. Looks like it's got some funny bits going on the front. Some restorations there. 357 length of back. Okay, French violin by Jean Trocard, 18th century there. 350 length back, interesting. 1800 to 2200. Looks like it's in some kind of Baroque or classical setup. Fairly heavy wear on the varnish. Quite like that. That's a quite nice looking instrument there. I think anything that's in a kind of historical setup kind of gets my vote, to be quite honest. French violin JTL, yeah, standard kind of stuff there. 20th century violin. Interesting back on that. 357. Kind of curious. It's one of those things that be interesting to see in person. 20th century German violin. 1000 to 1200. The French violin made in the workshop of Leo Cyr. Okay, interesting back choice there. Probably by R. Dubriel. It's kind of curious. Back there it's got repairs to the button. Yeah, slightly strange looking. French Lebert violin there, 700 to 800. That's kind of fairly standard here. Looks like we've got one without images there, so we can ignore that one. Another French violin of the workshop of Leo Cyr, 6 to 800. Yeah, really interesting choice of wood on these instruments. Really curious. Quite like the scroll actually. 600 to 800. Yeah, 358 length of back. I actually kind of like these. These are interesting. Usually I just hate all of this kind of period of French making, but these are kind of a bit quirky. Yeah, interesting. Quite like that. French violin de Blay, 5 to 700. It's fairly kind of standard there. Lebert Humbert, once again, it's the same old stuff we're seeing here. Right, French violin, early 19th century, 2.5 to 3,000 there. Interesting violin, 356. Yeah, interesting outline there. 20th century violin, bearing a Gennaro de Lucia label, 2 to 2.5. '19th century violin, probably French, made around 1800. It's in a bit of a state, that one. 1000 to 1500 on that. French violin made by Levesque, 1500 to 2000, 355 length of back. Another 20th century violin with a Capiccioni label. That's very nondescript, kind of difficult to tell what's going on there. French violin in the style of Breton. Yeah, this is all the same kind of stuff here. Anonymous French violin, 20th century. Should almost just stop looking at some of these because it's pretty much going to be all the same. 20th century German violin with the Leandro Biziak label. French JTL. Ooh, 20th century German violin there. That looks like your standard stuff. Yeah, that's your standard 19th, 20th century type thing. 20th century violin with a rocker label. That's again fairly standard. French Mircore violin. 20th century German violin. Let's see if there's anything interesting to this. Yeah, it's not too bad. French viola, excellent, made by Bernard Lefebvre, 1000 to 1200. That looks like quite tidy work actually. Interesting looking. 412, that's a good length. 1000 to 1200, looks in fairly good condition. It says, yeah, good condition. Yeah, that's quite nice. Quite like that actually. It's one of the nicest instruments so far. 20th century viola with a label of Eraclio Ranieri, 1947. Interesting. 1800 to 2000. 401 length of back. Yeah, it looks kind of okay. Let's see. Mircore French viola, early 20th century. This kind of double purfling, quite a tradey viola. Another viola here, 20th century with a label of Georges Chanot. Then what is going on with these F holes? That's really bizarre. It's like a viola d'amore kind of F holes, like flaming swords or something. Yeah, that's a bit of a weird looking instrument. Another Mircore French viola. Not very nice choice of wood on that one. Viola, probably from the Florence school, made at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, that looks very weird, the proportions. 423 there. School of Florence, that's kind of curious looking viola, that. Good length for a modern player, 5 to 7. Interesting. Modern 20th century cello, 2.5 to 3.5 there. Nothing super exciting. German cello, workshop of Riga and Fiorini, 3 to 4 on that. Right, we're finally on to the next page. This is taking a bit longer than expected. French Mircore cello. Modern cello, 20th century. Kind of fairly interesting choice of woods there. Another 20th century cello. Another Mircore cello here, 3 to 4. French cello, early 20th century, 3 to 4. Nothing super exciting so far. French cello made by Colin Mazaffi, 10 to 12,000 there. Needs a bit of work. It is amazing that Colin Mazaffi name does hold a lot of weight in value. French cello made by Cabassa, there, 3 to 4,000. It's quite an interesting cello, that. 3 to 4. I think I'd potentially prefer that over the Colin Mazar. Modern 20th century cello, Arpeggios label. Half-size cello from Central Europe. Okay, it's not a very nice looking item. Quarter-size Mircore cello there. Looks like we've got some documents and things. Letters. We can ignore all of that. A few books. Oh, we've got some other instruments here. Interesting. 19th century harp in gilded wood. 4 to 600. 19th century. I think that is definitely in need of substantial restoration. I think it's possibly not even worth restoring, to be honest. Wow, this is interesting. Roger's Charlemagne Emmanuel Forte piano, rectangular in shape. Interesting. The whole to be restored by appointment. Okay. That's a really beautiful looking piano there. Quite like that. Interesting. 600 to 800 euros. It's a bit criminal, really, isn't it? Bit criminal. Erard Forte piano. That's nice. Sebastian Erard, good maker. 5 to 700. You can already see this needs substantial restoration. I mean, the restoration cost on these things is pretty ridiculous, so hence the low price. We've got some bows here. Violin bow, anonymous there. Violin bow with the mark of Emilou Shah. Violin bow Louis Morizot. JTL bow there. Peugeot. Another Miracle bow here. Miracle JTL. 19th century violin bow. Bazin bow there. Lebert. Louis Morizot. Lebert again. Let's see. A few more French bows there. Miracle again. That's interesting. Let's have a look at this 19th century violin bow. Kramer model. Round beeswood abiel stick. Kind of interesting. I like these Kramer head bows. That looks like a good kind of transitional classical period bow. Speaking of, there's another one here actually, another Kramer style bow in exotic wood, 700 to 1,000 euros. I really do like these, some of those bows. A few more. Violin bow attributed to Gaud. Bazar bow there, Bazar. Miracle bows here, lots of Miracle stuff. More Miracle. Lots of bows just attributed to. Nothing super set in stone. More violin bows here. Miracle violin bows, Peugeot. School of Peugeot, Lebert, Bazar, Miracle. Right, okay, here's an interesting one here. Violin bow made by Eugene Nicolas Sartre, of which it bears the iron mark E. Sartre à Paris, 15 to 18,000 euros. This is a very popular bow maker. Wow, this has some heavy wear, this bow. That's pretty heavy round where the lapping is. That's kind of slightly odd to have that wear. You'd expect like a lot of wear up here, but that's really strange. Yeah, wear at the location of the trim lapping, that's kind of weird. Small burn part on the head and small wear close to the garnish. That's slightly unusual wear pattern, but okay. Well, interesting. That's a good bow there. Classic Baroque bows. Set of 2 bows, snakewood. Okay, I suspect that these are Chinese bows, but I could be wrong. Some more Miracle bows here. Okay, viola bow here. Taut style model. Made in dark Pernambuco. Kramer head. I think I'm just really do like this Kramer head. It's pretty cool. 2 to 3,000. That's an interesting looking bow. Got some cello bows here. Let's have a look at this. Cello bow made by Dominique Poisson. Okay. 1,500 to 2,000. Needs a fair bit of restoration there. So Seifert cello bow there. That's probably actually no pretty good bow. More cellos here, bazaar, set of bows, whole load of bows here. We won't get too much into that because you've got lots more left to look at. Some double bass bows here. Right, let's have a look at this double bass bow, probably made by André Chardon, 3-4. That's quite a nice French double bass bow. Oh, Landwehr, it's an interesting maker, does some interesting historical bows. Miscellaneous stuff, interesting case. Right, another JTL. We're back to the violins here, standard stuff. Another Mirko violin quattro. Like I said, all of this stuff is pretty much the same. The JTL. Don't expect, actually quite cool back on that, but don't expect too much things. 20th century German violin. Kind of pretty weird outline on that. Another Mirko violin, 20th century. 20th century German violin. So far, only a few interesting things. So we've got more of these French Mirko violins. We're just gonna keep seeing more of these. Some of them might have pretty nice woods. Others will be a little bit more dull, like these last two. Not very exciting. I say this is the problem with these French auction houses. They just have so much of the same stuff because Mirko really did churn stuff out. Shame about that. In the front could have been a slightly more interesting violin. See more Mirko stuff here. This is, I said, unfortunately just the same stuff, even though this is a pretty low quality one here. It's almost not worth bothering to look at some of this stuff. German violin, late 19th century. Let's get nothing too exciting there. Another French Mirko violin. Getting to lower tier stuff there. 20th century violin. Andre Bernard label. More Mirko stuff. 20th century. Right, 19th century French violin there. Iron Mark N Bourbon. 359 length of back. Yeah, kind of seen a few violins like this before. Very kind of odd, wide spaced F-holes. They're kind of quite wide edgework at the back, but it can actually be pretty good sounding instruments, I think, those. 5 to 700, more Mirko stuff. God, there's just so much of this stuff. That'll probably be popular with someone because of the wood on the back. 19th, 20th century amateur violin. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I just see that kind of stuff as some kind of lower trade stuff, but it could be amateur. French violin, 20th century. Standard stuff there. 19th century German. This is going to be the same again, and big open back there. Right, German violin, 19th century. Made as a copy of a Bergonzi. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fairly interesting there. 2 to 3, maybe a bit optimistic. French violin here. Let's see what else. German violin made by Reinhold Schmidt. French miracle violin with a Lutherie Artistique M. Quattro. Interesting photography there. 5 to 700. That deep red French varnish. Another JTL here. More miracle stuff. Another miracle violin here. Right, 19th century German violin. Okay, 359 length of back. Quite thin F-holes on that. Looks like it's had some weird things done to it. 20th century German again. French miracle violin, 20th century. Always remaining quite positive about these auctions, and then get into them and gets pretty much the same stuff every time, so not super exciting. More modern 20th century stuff there. 20th century violin. Okay, that's pretty weird. Giant AC on it. French miracle violin. 1500, so 150 to 200. Anonymous French violin, 19th century. Nothing too exciting there. French violin, 20th century. Okay. 19th century French violin. Okay, moving on. Let's hope for something better. Another French miracle violin, 19th century. It's had a bit of work done to that. French miracle, 20th century. Right, French miracle violin with a Guarnerius label, 150 to 200. This is pretty uninspiring stuff. French miracle, 20th century. I feel like I'm gonna have to start going past all of these. 20th century German. It's in a bit of a funny state with painted on flames, it looks like it. French violin. Yes, standard stuff. German violin, early 20th century. French miracle violin, early 20th century. German violin there. Yeah, we're just not really seeing anything super interesting. Miracle 20th century. It's all pretty similar. And there's some Vichy auctions coming up as well, which I think is going to be this all over again. So that's got me in fear. So I probably should have skipped past quite a lot of this stuff and just gone to interesting things, because we do know what most of this stuff is actually going to look at, but sometimes I think it's good to check just in case. 19th century violin. That's kind of interesting that they say that this is a 19th century German violin. I don't know, it's kind of parts of it look kind of a little bit kind of French from the back, but hopefully they know better than I do. Well, you'd hope so as a French auction house. French Breton violin. 20th century amateur violin. That one I could get on board with being an amateur violin. Kind of pretty bonkers scroll. So that's interesting. Wow, 370 length of back. That is pretty bonkers. But more interesting than most of the French violins. So that's saying something. More miracle stuff here. At least there was a couple of interesting things at the beginning. 20th century violin. French miracle violin, 20th century. made as a copy of Steiner. Okay. Miracle French violin. Yep, nothing exciting there. Another French Miracle violin. Another French Miracle violin. 20th century German. Yeah, it's all standard kind of stuff, really. So I like some of the English auctions are a bit more of a mixture of stuff, really. I find these French auctions just too heavy on French stuff. Kind of interesting back on that. Shame about the scroll, there's some repairs and things. Another Miracle thing is standard fare. 20th century violin. That's had the varnish messed around with, I think. French violin 19th century, looks like it's lost a lot of varnish. Something funny's gone on with that. 200 to 300. French Medifino, the low budget ones. Okay. French Miracle violin, 20th century. The De Soriot label. 20th century German violin, bearing a Jacobus Steiner label. That's got a bit more of an interesting line ahead than some of the ones that we see. 20th century German violin. Actually, shame the back on that is actually would have been quite nice if the join wasn't open, but rest of the violin not so interesting. French JTL violin there. 20th century German violin. French violin, labelled copy of Antonius Stradivarius. Another 20th century violin there. French violin, late 19th century, Nicholas Ain label. Looks pretty standard though, I don't think it's anything super exciting. Another French Miracle violin. That one's not too bad actually, needs a bit of restoration. Another Miracle violin here. German violin with a Storioni label. JTL here, nothing exciting. And French violin 19th century. Interesting portrait on the back. That's at least something interesting. Central European 20th century violin. 19th century German violin. 300 to 400. That's kind of interesting actually. Various traces of worm. Just in kind of slab cut wood there. 355. Quite like that scroll. That's quite interesting. Head made in copy. Okay. Interesting, like long F holes there. Well, that's at least fairly interesting to look at. French violin made by Mastfi, of which it bears the mark Mastfi at Toulouse. Revarnished on the bottom. 365. 400 to 500. You know, that is actually quite a nice violin. 400 to 500. It is unfortunately extremely large, but that's quite a nice violin. I think that would be pretty good price for 300 to 400 if you can deal with the extra kind of length there. But yeah, I think that's pretty decent violin. I'd say quite like that. French Miracle violin. That's not very nice. 20th century Central European. Right, next page. I think we're getting close to being at the end of violins, I think. 20th century German violin, nothing exciting there. Another 20th century German violin. Mirko violin. French violin quattro or quattro. Another 20th century German violin, or double purfling Regini type thing. 19th/18th century French violin with a label, an iron mark for Chapuis, 3 to 400. These are kind of interesting, some of these things, because some of these violins which came out of the Chapuis workshop did look like this, with this kind of weird kind of varnish, which looks like this is, you know, an early 20th century kind of Czech workshop violin. But some of these, believe it or not, some of these instruments were made in the 18th century or early 19th century, but you wouldn't believe it to see it. So really, that's kind of interesting example. Slightly weird spacing of the F holes and other odd traits, but yeah, curious examples of making at that time. German violin, early 20th century. It's not too bad. French violin, 20th century. Still hoping for something decent to come along, but French 3/4 Mirko. I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this auction, so clearly that's probably not going to happen. More French 3/4 here. I'm not even going to bother with those. 20th century 3/4, another French, another Mirko. More 3/4, 7/8 Mirko, half size Mirko, half size Mirko again, half size. Right, we've got some guitars. Jerome classical guitar made in Mirko. Everything is in Mirko. Nothing super there. Cousineau classical. Right, guitar probably by JTL in its original coffin case, or period correct coffin case. Looks in a bit of a state. 3 to 500. I think that's way too much. Leold Pick Contra guitar. These are pretty cool. Ready to play. 4 to 500. Yeah, it's had a big kind of crack restoration there. These are pretty cool though. 4 to 500. It's not an outrageous estimate. It's the kind of classical guitar. This is an interesting double top classical there. Carl Richter. 3 to 400. Romantic guitar in the spirit of 19th century. 4 to 500. It's okay, nothing too exciting. It'd be interesting to see what the tuners are on this. Sometimes these guitars have some really nice tuners. Carmelo Catania guitar. 150 to 200. That's a kind of curious looking thing, isn't it? Yamaha classical. It's a folk guitar there. Seagull 12 string. Fender Stratocaster there, made in Mexico. 5 to 700. Charango, that's pretty cool. Cristofaro Neapolitan mandolin. 150 to 200. Nothing super. Looks a bit fancier than I think it actually is. Another Neapolitan but Mirko violin. 80 to 120. Another kind of mandolin there. An oud, 20th century, bearing a label in Arabic from a merchant in Cairo. This is actually fairly kind of ornate one. Doesn't look too bad. Still looks, I think, probably like a tourist one rather than a professional one, but I could be wrong. Gramophone and gramophone bits. Got saxophones here. Selmer saxophone. Always got to have a Selmer saxophone on a French auction. Yvette and Schaefer alto saxophone. More tenor saxophone. Paul Buscher saxophone. Now we're on to the final page. Nils alto saxophone. Another Selmer here. Okay. Lyrist alto saxophone. Another alto saxophone here. Alright, it's a Moek brand bass recorder with its box. 80 to 120. I mean, that, to be fair, is a really good estimate. If you could get it for that, you'd be laughing, I think. JTL transverse flute in its case. It's kind of quite sweet. Noblet transverse flute in silver plated metal. And a Godefroy Ain transverse flute, 5 to 700. Okay. Well, there you have it. That is the end of the kind of Millon Napoleon auction. That went on for way longer than I kind of expected, and unfortunately wasn't really that great. A lot of the same kind of boring French instruments of the lower level. Very few other things which are interesting. Few kind of other musical instruments, non-bowed strings that were interesting, but in general not the greatest auction, unfortunately. But there we go. It's good to look at these things because you never know what might appear. This might have been an interesting instrument, this 18th century French violin, if we'd seen a few more pictures, but for whatever reason they just had this one on. So yeah, I'll put a link in the description as always. Check it out, see what you think. If you've got any comments, please let me know. Yeah, I apologise. I should have really skipped past loads of this French stuff, but like I said, you never know sometimes what you might find. So thanks a lot for watching once again. I'll catch you next time. Ciao.